Hi, today I'm going to be giving my refutation speech on why socialism should not be used as a political and economic system in the United States. Now, before I do that, there's a few things that I want to define. It's going to be the role of government, socialism, and the free market and capitalist definitions. So, when we get into this argument, we need to ask ourselves one key question, and that's going to be what the role of government is in society. Now, between socialism and free market capitalism, there's two different ways of looking at it. Socialism is going to, the role of the government there is to provide everything for its citizens. You go to the government for your health care, your education, your job, your basic income, anything you can imagine, it's all provided for by the government. That is their role in a socialist society. Now, in a free market capitalist society like what we have, it's a lot different from that. The role of the government, and I'm going to be quoting or paraphrasing Stephen Crowder here. The role of the government is not to pick a winner or a loser. It's not to provide services or anything of that nature. It's to keep its citizens safe and to keep them from, for lack of a better term, screwing each other over. Luckily, we have some great framework for that. The Constitution is how we do this, and the Declaration of Independence is why we do this. Now, I'll be the first to admit that socialism as an idea sounds great. Everything is provided for everyone. You don't have to worry about how you're going to get educated, how you're going to get your health care, how you're going to have a job, keep the lights on, roof over your head, any of that stuff. That's all provided for you. So on the front of it, it sounds cool. And everything is fair. I mean, no one's making more than someone else. There's not a disadvantage. You're not getting, jacked over or anything like that. It sounds really nice. And then socialism is defined as a political and economic theory of social organization that advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. So it sounds pretty good. The problem is that there is not a difference between socialism and communism. And communism is basically state-run everything. The state owns, controls, and operates everything. And this is coming from a communist himself. Vladimir Lenin, one of the famous former Soviet leaders, famously said, "The goal to socialism is communism." Now, this differs a lot from free market capitalism. A free market is defined as an economic system in which prices are determined by unrestricted competition between privately owned businesses. And capitalism is going to be an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit rather than by the state. Now, there's a lot of moral differences in this, and one of the things that people that support socialism say are they go after the so-called 1%. And Bernie Sanders, especially in this last election, was very famous for that. The 1% this, the top percentage this, what have you. And the idea under socialism is that the reason that you go to it is that the top percentage of the company or country owns everything and controls everything. But in the United States, at least, the top 1% isn't defined by your billionaires and even multimillionaires and things like that. We tend to think of it as like your Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerbergs, Oprah Winfrey's, people that have multiple millions or billions of dollars. However, in reality, it's a lot lower than that. The 1% of earners in a joint household income in the United States make $306,000 a year. The top 2% is $192,000 of gross joint income yearly. And that may sound like a lot, especially to, college students like us. Like, I don't make anywhere near that. I would love to make even a fraction of that, although technically I do, but different argument. That doesn't go very far in a lot of cities in the United States. So New York, LA, San Diego, Chicago, that's not that much money to live off of. So if we're going to be squeezing that population of earners to provide for everything else, that's not going to be a great outcome. Another argument that's made by people that like socialism is that Wall Street is inherently bad. The competition on Wall Street, it's greedy, that sort of thing. But when you think about it, A lot of us are very invested in Wall Street. A lot of people work for companies that are on Wall Street. A lot of people, if you have a 401k or know someone that has a 401k, they're relying on their entire retirement that the Wall Street does well. We want them to do well because then you can benefit from that. You can, retire on the fruits of your labor, not having to work forever. So Wall Street is actually a good thing. Now, the other big thing that's kind of shocking about socialism, and it's, very un-American, is it involves the abolition of private property. So the clothes on your back, the device that you're watching me on right now speak about this, you don't own any of that. That's all owned by the government, and that is very against American values and what we're used to. One thing that I touched on in my previous speech was how America was inherently a socialist country. You can even go back so far as before we were a country, when the very first colonies, like with John Smith. When they first got here, they were all communal, all socialist based. So everyone got their, grain from the community, they got their tools, that sort of thing. The problem was that didn't work because some people worked harder than others, and then some people didn't work at all, and the result was a lot of famine, and a lot of people died, and it just didn't work. So the next season, John Smith famously said, he quoted the Bible in this, "He who does not work does not eat." So that's going back into capitalism, back into that free market society. Basically, what you are putting out there is what you are getting out of the system. The harder you work, the more that you're going to get, the more fruits of your labor that you have. Now, as far as real-world examples, there are a lot of different, most of the world is actually socialist or communist in some sense of the word. Some of the more extreme examples are going to include Russia, Venezuela, and North Korea. Russia, as a matter of fact, like with their textbook communism when they were the Soviet Union, right after the World Wars. And again, they saw a lot of famine. There was a lot of restriction of freedoms. It wasn't a great place to live. And if you look, there was actually a time where one of their leaders, Boris Johnson, this was kind of more towards the end of the World War, or excuse me, the Cold War. He came and saw a supermarket here, and he was just astounded at all of the selection because of the free markets that we had, all of the products that could be offered, because the Soviet Union had nothing like that. And if you look at more modern examples like North Korea, really the last true communist country in the world, riddled with famine, human rights violations rather, and it's just a horrible, horrible place to live. And if you look just south of the border, the citizens that are essentially the same population, there's a difference of 4 inches in height. There's lots of difference in intelligence and things like that just because of the way that they're brought up. They don't have as much access, or the North that is, they don't have the same type of access to, healthcare and good food and things like that. And there's really no way to get out of that because they're a centralized economy and country. They don't trade with other countries. They don't trade within themselves even. It's all just provided by the government. Now, that said, there are still socialist countries. I know that socialism, communism, they really are the same thing. But if you look at lesser countries that are, more Western examples like Sweden and Denmark, you've got tax rates that are just insane. They're anywhere from 40, 50, 60%. So for every dollar that you make, you're only keeping about half of that. The rest of it's going into socialist programs that you don't really have a say in how it's spent. Take, college, for example. A lot of these places, in Europe offer free college. That's going to pay for someone's free college. What if you decide that you don't want to go to college? You're not benefiting from that system at all, but your money is still going to pay for that. Now, a couple of things that I talked about in my previous speech as far as examples. The first was being the post office, how that's a socialist program. The post office before competition was a lot different than what we were seeing now. You didn't have tracking numbers. You didn't have overnight shipping. Any of these things that we think is commonplace now, it didn't exist. You put your package or postage or whatever in the post office, and you hope that it got there in a timely manner. There was nothing of that. And that didn't change until the free market came through, when FedEx started offering this stuff. And then now you have UPS and various other couriers in order to do this. You can even look at education this way to the same degree. generations before us, there was no federal education system. Public education was still around, but it was funded by the states and municipalities. And the results are pretty much the same. If anything, the prior to the federal education system, grades and intelligence were actually slightly higher. Now, the final thing, and kind of one of the big moral arguments, is healthcare. So you should never be able to go somewhere um, and be turned down for medical assistance because you cannot pay. And I agree with that. The problem is the way that it's implemented does not allow for cheap costs. We look at Obamacare now, and the average deductible for a person is $6,000 on that. So you would have to pay $6,000 into that system before you're going to start being covered by it. And costs have skyrocketed. I mean, if you look at states like Arizona, the costs of it are over 100% before Obamacare was passed. And the main problem with that is, I mean, you can look at, that's just how the government bureaucracies have done it. But if you look at, what it's done now, 1 in 5 doctors do not accept Medicare patients now as new patients if they're on Medicare, and that's never been seen in the history of this country before. So it drives costs up, and it's really not an effective system to run our country off of. And we've never really been a socialist country before. All of the stuff that we've ever had, the innovation that we've had, it's all due to free market. It's because people have the ability to go out and improve upon something and profit from that. And if we go to policies that support that, that's going to be what puts America back on top as not only a world leader, but someone that's a great innovator and a great provider for its own citizens. And that's going to be the best way to take care of them. Thank you.